Hello, everyone. I'm Dara Bunjon. I'm the food enthusiast here at More Living. If this is your first time tuning in, or if you've listened to the shows before, I'm a food writer, food stylist, PR maven, and a very frustrated baker. Just a general reminder that all 93 shows, can you believe that number, of the Food Enthusiasts are archived on our Facebook page and website, More Living. So enjoy them on your runs, your walks, your drives. And just to remind you, this is a live show. So when we have guests, you have a question, just type it in the comments and you'll see me sort of look to the side and we'll bring it into the context of the show. That brings me to this week's guest, Elise Museles, certified eating psychologist and nutritional expert, author of the just released book, The Food Story, Rewrite the Way You Eat. Here we go. Get a good look at that. And she's a podcaster of Once Upon a Food Story. Let's welcome Elise. Have her bring her in. Hi, Elise.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm doing fine. What's on your plate today?
Well, I love that you said that you are a food enthusiast because that's a great title and that's a good thing to be. And also the frustrated baker, I can really relate to that too, because that's me. I always say I'm not a baker, but I try. I'll keep trying because I don't want to live in that old story.
Well, when did that light bulb go off and why? That had you change your career from an attorney and move forward into eating in the nutritional path?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, which says a lot because I was always interested in health and wellness. And I went to law school and then I had a career in immigration law, worked at the Department of Justice. And it's not that I didn't enjoy what I was doing, but I was always passionate about health and wellness. And so at some point the laws changed. It was much harder I was a mom and it was much harder to keep families together with the stringencies of the immigration laws. And I just wasn't feeling as good about the work that I was doing. And so I took some time away from it. And it just became really clear to me that if people were coming to me, asking me questions, what do you think of this? Or should I do that? And it was just really organic, no pun intended, but I didn't one day say, I'm switching careers, and I think for anyone who's kind of got that itch, it's not like I woke up and, oh, it was so clear. And then I just did it. There were lots of doubts. There was lots of should I, shouldn't I? And when I went to a program, I actually carried around the brochure from the Institute for Integrative Nutrition for a year. Should I really do this or not? Is it the right thing? But once I said I made the commitment, it felt so right. And I love what I do and I love the space I'm in and, just being able to help people feel better in their bodies.
Well, discovering your food story and how it can lead to understanding the root of unwanted health and eating challenges. All these factors into influencing our eating behavior. You said everybody has a food story. And maybe I should ask what your food story is.
Sure.
Or what is a food story? So I throw that back at you.
Okay, yeah, let's start with what a food story is, and then I can give you some pivotal moments of mine. So you're right, everybody has a food story, and we don't often think of our how we relate to food as part of the story, but it is. And the way that I came up with it, it's actually related to your first question about law, is that I started seeing clients. I was realizing that it was so much more than what we were eating. There were so many other factors that came into play that were part of what I like to say of the nourishment equation, our thoughts, just the way we are around food.
Right.
And so I would say to clients, tell me about your relationship with food. And they would look at me like, oh gosh, wait, let's not go there. It's complicated. Like if I asked you, can you tell me about your relationship with food? Would you like suddenly want to like just spill the beans, you know? And so people were really like just very, you could see their shoulders shrugging. And so this was back in 2012. And Oprah was talking about story, and there was just like a lot more conversation about life story, relationship story. So I'm like, we have a food story. And so I started thinking about what a food story is. It's a lifetime of meals and messages and memories. And there's, you know, villains and plot twists and chapters. And it's very dynamic. And it's not just you and food. And so I started talking to clients and said, tell me about your food story. Food story. I never really thought about it like that.
Right.
Yeah, and so people became interested. And when they could see that there were so many factors at play, it oftentimes helped release some of the shame or the guilt or the negative feelings and the feelings that we have that make us feel bad that around the way we relate to food. And so it just started, you know, a whole conversation. I'd like to say it's the beginning of a movement where people think about how they relate to food in a much more dynamic and different way. So that's how I came up with it. And that was in 2012. And you showed my book already. And now here we are still talking about it. I have a podcast, and we all have a food story.
Right. That we do.
Did it make you, when you started like learning about my work, did you think about your own food story?
Absolutely. And talked with a couple of people, considering the title of the show, The Food
Yeah.
Enthusiast. Food is a great passion of mine. And why is that? I can go back into how I was raised and what the dinner table looked like in my family. And that leads to food to me is love, because we sat down as a family unit to dinner. There was no TV, there was no newspaper, don't even consider cell phones.
Right.
And even in third grade, I might talk about that Tommy pulled my pigtail, but my parents listened. So that situation is always like love. Plus, I have a heightened sense of smell. And one might call me I can't think of the word, memory loss. What can I say? I'm a master taster. I pick up things that other people don't do. And I have a penchant for sweet and citrus. So my buds go there. But I understand what you're saying. And you had brought up a subject, I think it was the first paragraph in the book, saying that when we come into the world as a baby,
Yeah.
that we have no preconceived notions about food. We eat until we're satiated, and that's it. Somewhere along the line, the barriers come up. And I'm assuming this is what your book is about, as we talked before. But I was discussing this with a friend. She says, I have no children. She says, but when you have a young infant, they do react to your face. So maybe your mood is being transmitted in some way.
Oh,
I
I
don't
think
know.
so. I definitely, I think, you know, everything's energy. You feel energy all the time. So you can feel the energy that goes into your food, or from when someone's making it for you and they're like excited for you, you know, you feel that positive energy. You feel the stress energy too, but you feel that. I do agree. And that what you describe from your dinner table, I mean, it sounds like there was just warmth and comfort, and like food was happy, and there weren't a lot of like negative associations with your meals. So now do you try to have those kind of meals, or is it just natural for you to have those
Do I
meals?
have to pay for this session? I just want to know.
I just was curious if you carried on that, like if that
Well,
stayed with you.
food's important to me. Let's say COVID has played a part with everybody,
Yeah.
the being confined. I have become I'm not even in Florida. I've become a snowbird. I get up in the morning. Well, when I go to bed at night, I go, what am I going to have for breakfast? When I have breakfast, what am I going to have for lunch? Because there isn't that much to focus on. And it's what I do.
Right.
Food is it. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a great baker, but
That's the
food
old
is central to my being, and that's how I show my love to other people.
and to yourself.
Right. It doesn't mean that I don't have certain hang-ups. There was a book, it was coming back to me. This was a ways ago called The Memoirs of Bambi Goldbloom. And in it, she says there are three stages of life: dieting, thinking about dieting, and going off of your diet.
Yeah.
And so many of us, feel the need, when we have the extra weight, we feel food guilt.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a term that you use, I'm not sure it's the same thing. Is that food noise or food guilt the same thing?
They're not the same thing, but food noise, let me say what food noise is, but just to back up, that you were saying, that this time period has definitely changed how we relate to food, or for a lot of people, some people are taking their health more seriously and, connecting it to what they're eating. Other people have found that they're triggered, and so whatever position you're in, I think the most important thing is to realize like that we need to be compassionate with ourselves, that these are extraordinary circumstances,
All
and
right.
it's as like as much as it doesn't seem like this is temporary, it is temporary, and we will get back to eventually having, a new normal. And so I just want to make sure people are gentle with themselves. So food noise is really all the external messages that you receive on a daily basis. There's no way to eliminate it. It's there. It's a part of our modern culture. Diet culture, plays a huge part. And now is a really good time to talk about food noise. It's that, right after New Year, you're getting all these ads and messages about weight loss and
Right.
or plans that, now weight loss is becoming, people are not liking talking about weight loss because of the anti-diet culture movement, but it's still a diet in another name: cleanses, detoxes, and sometimes those are helpful, but you're getting all these messages all the time, especially right now. And what it does is it disconnects you from your body and trusting yourself, because you think, maybe I should, this influencer or this friend or whatever, And the thing about food noise is to recognize it, not to think you can eliminate some of it, but you can't eliminate all of it, to recognize where it's coming from and realize that nobody knows your body the way you do. And even though it may seem like you don't know, or you're making choices that aren't the best, you when you can reconnect back to your body, and there are exercises in the book, then you can start to know whether this superfood is good for you, or intermittent fasting. But you can't just do it because someone else said it. You can be curious and try it, but you always have to come back to, how does this feel to me?
Right. Well, that goes back to food guilt too. Um, uh, the food noise, I understand it's what's being projected to you. It's in the magazines. You see all the slim girls. Um, Anorexia is definitely a result of food noise.
Sometimes.
It's,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, my feeling that that need to be, it's projected to us thin, slim,
Right.
um, definitely puts a pressure on you. I choose to ignore it. um,
But so
but
many of us internalize that, and that's where the problem is. It's what happens when you take it all in, and then no longer hear your own voice and the messages and all of, and your own body. You mentioned guilt, food guilt. So I just wanted to say that that's like, food noise can make you feel guilty, but it's a whole separate thing. And it's so prevalent. I mean, the guilt that we all feel. And, it's funny, in my original book proposal, I had a whole chapter on food guilt, but it kind of like now permeates through, so many different conversations that it doesn't even,
right,
it's not even its own chapter. It's just in different parts. But it's such a theme for so many people in their food story, is feeling guilty. But I was just talking to someone about, they were talking about how they felt so guilty about, like, they're eating tons of their grandmother's lasagna, during the holidays.
all right,
And, there's all kinds of nourishment. and we have to acknowledge that. And there's also soul nourishment. And her grandmother was no longer around. And that lasagna and that whole experience connected her back to her grandmother. And there's something, about that. And why feel guilty about that? That's one meal or two meals, and we eat 3 times a day or more. There's a lot of meals where you can eat the foods that are maybe more nutrient dense, but like, just realize that kind of nourishment has its place. And then the other thing is, like, if you eat it and then you feel guilty, I want to know what the point of that is, like, because you just took away all the pleasure from what you were experiencing. So either you eat it,
That's interesting.
right? You eat it and you enjoy it, and like
And then
that,
you feel guilty, and then it's not a joy.
right? Or
Right.
you decide, I don't like how I feel. It physically doesn't make me feel good. Or, I never feel good after I have this. And you make a decision not to have it, but don't eat it and then feel bad about it.
Okay, I have a question that came in.
Oh, good.
With all the food noise out there, how do you suggest individuals learn to discriminate between worthwhile and junk foods?
You mean like junk noise? That's junk food noise.
I
It's not
guess
really
so.
about junk food, but I get it. Yeah. So I would start with just being aware of all the messages you're receiving throughout the day. When you open up Facebook, when you turn on the news, when you're talking to your friends, when you're sitting down even to eat, what's the dialogue? Like, how have you internalized it, and start talking to yourself? So without judgment, just being curious, take inventory. That's the first place to start, because you can't, eliminate it or get rid of it until
Right.
you know what you're dealing with. And so I think it's and it's so eye-opening to realize, like, you're getting hundreds of messages daily, and you don't even, they're just like part of your day. So you're not, discriminating. And so I would just start with that. And then once you go through that, like, really ask yourself, is this for me? Is this me talking, or is this me just believing what so-and-so said, or do I think I have to do it? And I'm all for trying new things. I mean, otherwise we'd be always stuck in repeating the same patterns over and over again, but don't make it gospel. Make sure you're constantly checking in to notice how it feels in your body. And if
Right.
if it feels good, or if it's easy to integrate and is sustainable. So I hope that answered the question.
Hopefully. We'll find out. We'll see if we get a response back. Stress, as you said, is an anti-nutrient that impacts your digestion, your metabolism, nutrient assimilation, and more. Now, I know as soon as anxiety affects me, it's right to my gut. I physically
Yeah.
feel it.
Yeah.
And some people might not, but some people might get headaches, whatever, right to my gut. Let's talk about, we're going to hold up the book again, Food Story. You see, now that comes out straight. Now that we're talking about being in reverse.
I know, I'm backwards. It's throwing me because I feel like I'm not looking at you. I hope I am, but I feel like
You are looking at me. I'm sort of looking a little bit to the side too, but that's the advantage of the podcast. You don't have to, you can be there with your hair in curlers. This took 5 hours to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up stress, because actually that's chapter 7. I mean, I talk about this all the time, and I think about it all the time, and I work with clients, and we work to reduce stress. But that's my favorite. I think it's my favorite, one of my favorite chapters in the book. It's chapter 7. It's called Don't Bring Stress to the Table. And so it would be like, not realistic to say eliminate all stress, right? Because that's just a fact of our modern lives. But the kind of stress that I'm referring to is the self-imposed stress that we have around food that we bring with us while we're eating. So that could be things like, sorry about that. That could be things like, is this going to make me bloated? Oh my gosh, how many calories are in this? Am I allowed it? Did so-and-so say this is part of the plan? Like, why am I so bad? Or, like, just the little things. Or is, like, is this really good for me? And it could just be subtle noise, internal noise that we have all the time, but we have these conversations with ourselves, and sometimes we don't even know that they're happening because they're just like the soundtrack that we play over and over again. And when we have those thoughts, which we all do, or we're picking up our phone and kind of like eating and looking at the phone, and that's bringing in some stress, or I've got this deadline, or I have to answer these emails, and oh my God, the meeting. And, we're having all this, like the multitasking too, that creates a stress. And so what happens to your body physiologically, and this is, by the way, I didn't really get into my food story, but learning about this science was a huge wake-up call for me and a pivotal moment in my food story where I actually started changing the way I was thinking. Okay, so my story was about finding the perfect diet, being the perfect example for my family, my growing community. So there was always like this stress underlying everything. Even
Right.
though I was eating like kale, quinoa, whatever, all the superfoods. It didn't matter that I was constantly putting pressure on myself. So what happens is when you sit down to eat and you're not in a relaxed state, your sympathetic nervous system is activated. And like you mentioned, your digestion is less effective. Your metabolism slows down. You don't assimilate all the nutrients. And something you mentioned in your food story is you don't get pleasure from that meal. So all of that is happening because of your thoughts. And that's when I say don't bring stress to the table. I'm talking about trying to do things like not multitask, taking a few deep breaths before eating so that you can be more relaxed when you sit down to eat.
Well, being alone, my eating, I can't just sit there and eat. So it's TV. That's my entertainment. I can't read. Maybe there's a moment, but that's a compulsion. And I know that there are a lot of other people like me. You turn on the TV, it's like, what am I going to snack on? There's a need.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
used to be a smoker and I quit when I was 40. So there's that sort of that need to put something in my mouth. That's part of my food story, but
Mhm.
I understand it. Chapter 9.
Well, can I
Use,
just ask you one quick thing? If
sure.
you know that about yourself, everybody's different. And just because I'm saying like multitasking isn't ideal, maybe you can pay attention to the type of TV you're watching, something not stressful, or like there could be something like, I think the news and eating, especially these days, is really not a good combination. I turn on the news and I'm like, is there any good news? So maybe you can find something that feels like relaxing to watch or peaceful, or that it could
I
help with
watch
that energy.
I watch murder mysteries, especially British
Ooh,
ones. I
okay.
don't watch the news. I stopped that 4 years ago. I
Wow.
went, I couldn't, it's my concept, whether it's right or wrong. I haven't written a book. If I can't change it, I'm not going to worry about it. That's it. I couldn't watch Orange Head, and I'm not watching it now. I cannot affect any type of change or what's going on. I have no control over it, so I ignore it. And that's how I deal with that stress. Now that we've gone into my psyche, we're going to come back. Chapter
Fun
9.
though. You're probably people watching want to know about you. So it's good to share.
Yeah. Chapter 9 in your book, Food Story. Use food to boost your mood. Who hasn't done that? And then you said, worry about what food can do to you. Think about what food can do for you.
Right.
I thought that was pretty powerful.
Yeah. Okay. So just to back up a minute, I feel like the person who's reading my book has probably tried a lot of things, gone on a lot of different diets, or just, become vegan, paleo, whatever. And so I wanted to have a completely different approach that felt new, because it is about rewriting your food story. And when that little shift, that narrative shift, instead of worrying about what food can do to you, like, will it go straight to my thighs? Will I feel bloated? Will I, whatever, fill in the blank? you start thinking about everything food can do for you. It can help you feel calm. It can, make you stronger. Like, we're all worried about our immunity right now. And you start thinking about food in that way, like everything it can do for you. It's just, it completely changes the way that you think about what you're eating, like, wow, food is actually my friend and can do all these positive things for my mind and body. So that was the decision why I made all my recipes by mood. And, there are certain nutrients that can help you feel a certain way. And I
Right.
think that's really empowering. And you don't have to memorize, all the nutrients. And I give an example. I say, once upon a time, we didn't know what a calorie was or a carbohydrate or a protein or fat. And that eventually we learned, right? And we learned what
Right.
felt right in our body. And the same thing can happen when you think of how foods can make you feel certain ways or, feel certain moods. And you just start learning which foods are, can help you feel radiant, or which foods are more calming or can help you feel focused. And so that was where it all came from. And there's a lot of science in the book, chapter 9, that people can learn about, like neurotransmitters and serotonin and the gut brain connection and all of that, and how the food
They
impacts
can pick up the book, The
you. Right.
Food Story. There's a lot in the book, a lot to be gained. And I would say half the book is recipes. It's not a cookbook, but as you said, it's sort of a guide how to look at food via moods. And I'm not going to try to explain that. Get the book. Let's talk about, what is the best piece or worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Ooh.
One or the other or both?
Best or worst? Cool. I wasn't expecting that kind of thing. Okay, so I can't think of the worst right now. Maybe I blocked it out, but like
If you
what
can
came
think
to
of,
mind was, well, I mean, I think the best piece of advice, and I don't know if I have it in a succinct sentence, but just was when I was working with my mentor, who I mentioned in the book. And he, this was before we all realized how harmful perfectionism is, and he just said that, like, you're like beating yourself up all day long when you're in that quest for the perfect diet or being the perfect role model or whatever, all those things that I mentioned earlier. And, like we sometimes perfectionists are proud of the drive and, what they've achieved with being, not perfect, but along the striving, but realizing that that striving was actually harmful was such a huge wake up call for me. So I feel like that was so pivotal. And, even though I don't have the exact
right.
advice, that was the best. And the worst, I've probably blocked the worst out. I've gotten some bad advice along the way
I,
though.
I throw it up as an option. Another question, let's see. What's your favorite, most indulgent food that brings a smile to your face and your body?
Okay. Well, I don't know if it's so indulgent, but I love sourdough bread. I really do love that. And, it's just, I mean, I'm not anti-carb at all, but I would say that that's like, it just makes me happy. I also love chocolate, but dark chocolate mostly, and do eat that almost daily.
Okay. Your podcast, Once Upon a Food Story, and people can pick that up on all the different podcast hosts. All they have to do is, like for me, Google's podcast. I just type it in and it comes up. Who's your next guest coming on the show?
Oh, well, as soon as we're done, I'm going to get ready for an interview. I have some women. It's a mother-daughter duo. So wait, let me just back up for one quick second.
Okay.
Everybody who comes on the podcast shares, some snippet of their food story. And it's really, I love hosting the podcast because it's a way to dive deeper into these conversations. And almost everyone who comes on the show will say to me, I've never shared that before. And then as a host, I feel like, yes, this is success, because I want people to connect through stories, to have those conversations. That's what you're doing too. And so my next guest that I'm interviewing, not the next podcast episode, is a mother-daughter duo. So they're called the Curry Girls Kitchen, and they work together, but I'm going to get each of their food stories, how they influence each other's food stories, get a little juicy on the mother-daughter relationship. Because I mean, I think a lot of mothers and daughters, whether you're a mother or you're a daughter or you're both, will be able to relate to the conversation. And it's going to be really fun. I love having two people who have impacted one another come on together.
That sounds quite interesting.
Yeah.
Is there a common thread throughout everyone's stories?
Ooh, I think we all connect, but by hearing stories, and like usually when you hear something about someone's story, even if their circumstances aren't the same, it'll help you remember. A lot of people will talk about their grandparents, and how their grandparents have influenced them. I do hear that. The common thread among women is also like the good enough and the seeking perfection and all of that, and just not being at peace, finding that inner peace with food, just really,
Right.
and learning how to trust yourself. That's the major thing. But I think that, like, from a feel-good perspective, a lot of people have been influenced by their grandparents and don't even like realize it until they start thinking about it and talking about it.
A question that somebody gave me last night: why can't people just enjoy food for the sake of enjoying food?
Well, I think that enjoying food is really important, and just the way our culture is now, there's also so much more that's attached to food, like what it
Right.
does for you. So, I guess that would be, I feel like people should enjoy food, but also be aware of how it feels in their body. So make choices that feel good to them. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yes.
But
Yes.
the answer to the question is because of all the noise, like that we're told that we have to do things differently or in a certain way, and not back to just being connected to our bodies and what feels good
Right.
and what our ancestors probably did.
We're going over, and I probably have 20 more questions to ask you, but I'm going to wrap it in, bring it in, and appreciate the time that you've spent on the show. I usually ask the question because you have numerous recipes in Food Story. What was your most epic culinary fail?
My most epic culinary fail. There have been a lot. And, sometimes even recipes that are intended to be one way end up becoming something else. I I've had a lot. I don't even know what the most, probably something with baking. And then I never ended up publishing the recipe. Like baking, the thing is, and this might be true for you too, baking is much more exact. And I'm one of those that's very intuitive. And half the times, unless I'm recipe testing, I don't measure, I toss it all together. Oh, this sounds good. And I have so much fun just being creative in the kitchen.
Right.
With baking, it's much more scientific, and exact. And so I can't let that side out. And so I've had plenty of baking fails that, things that were supposed to rise sunk, and, too many to name, cookies that just were not good.
Been there, and have a drawer full of t-shirts.
Okay.
Okay.
But I think, you wanted people to have fun and, like, just a creative outlet and a way to connect to your food, and not to worry so much about what, it being perfect or what it looks like, or, it doesn't look like the recipe photo that's been styled by someone like you. And.
Right. Before I forget, Elise's contact information about the book, the podcast has come up in the notes. And you can go to her website, Elise, am I saying Museles or?
Perfect. That's perfect.
EliseMuseles.com. And that's Museles, and Elise, ELISE.com. You can reach her everything you need to connect to the podcast about the book. The book you can find on Amazon. Just type in Food Story Elise and it'll come up. Last question, Elise. What didn't I ask you that I should have?
You asked a lot of questions. I guess just that, I mean, what I want to say is that even if you're struggling, and feel not comfortable in your body and comfortable with or trust yourself to make the best choices, and no matter how long you've been disconnected from your body, that you can still learn to trust yourself. You can still learn to know what feels good to you. You can learn to quiet the food noise, and you can rewrite your food story. That it's possible. Doesn't matter how old you are. And if you don't want to change, that's fine too. But if there's something where you just don't feel completely relaxed, that I encourage people to really do, peel back the layers and do the work, because it doesn't feel good to not feel good, about
Right.
yourself. And the last thing is that it impacts everything, like how you show up in the world, your confidence, and the way you interact with people. And so I just hope people will, dig into their food story and find a way to start, trusting themselves and feeling good about their choices.
Well said. Elise, thank you so much. And we're now close friends, and
Yeah,
you know my story, I know your story.
I had so much more to ask you, but I'm like, well, that could be if you want to come on my podcast. We can dig into yours.
Whenever you want to do it, I'm available.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah.
Well, let me do a big mwah, because that's what I do.
Okay.
And I'm going to just wrap up with some notes. And Jen will probably pop you out of the scene in a moment. There you go. And everybody, just Elise Museles, thank you so much. Food Story, find it on Amazon.com. Next week's show, Sarah Symington, owner of Baltimore's Best Breakfast, Blue Moon and Blue Moon 2, famous for its Captain Crunch French toast. I'm sure Elise is enjoying this conversation. And the other over-the-top breakfast edibles. I look forward to a very fun interview with Sarah. She is Miss Personality. If you need to reach me, my Instagram has been restored. It's at Dara Cooks or Food at J Moore Living. You will find this episode of the Food Enthusiast up on the J Moore Living Facebook page and jmoreliving.com. And as always, we appreciate when you share the show, even from the archives or this brand new show, sending the links to your friends and family. It helps the show grow, and we appreciate that. So until next week, may your plates always, always remain full.